My first speaker tonight, I think, can address part of this because he's from the Department of Corrections of Indiana, and he's a friend of Kairos. So David, would you come up and talk to us here tonight?
It truly is wonderful to be here tonight. And when Evelyn finally revealed the theme of overcome, it's like, okay, that gives me a lot to work with because we overcome a lot in correction. You know, and thinking of the passage, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Being in prison is pretty much a way of saying you got some trouble. You've had some troubles. You might need to rethink what you've been doing. But the great news is he has overcome the world. And don't ever lose sight of that. It gets discouraging. People fail, we fail, I fail, but we know the end result. The world has been overcome by Christ. Want to just for a minute talk about the bags. And we loved being able to do this because Indiana DOC loves Kairos. We value Kairos. And this was a no-brainer to have our plus units put together the bags. Our prison industries did the printing. But I know there's a card in here saying, this was made and donated as a labor of love. Did anyone tell you anything about the prison where this is made? So this is a prison that has had individuals win awards at the state fair for quilting. They have given quilts that have been on display in the governor's office, in the vice president's residence. I got to present a quilt to Miss America. And you think, wow. They also did a really cool project where the family of every Hoosier serviceman who was killed in the War on Terror received a memorial quilt customized for their loved one. So this all started at Wabash Valley Correctional Facility, and that's a maximum security male prison. People think, oh, well, sewing, that's women. Well, no, it's not. But where the quilting came from, about 15 years ago, we had a volunteer who I think was also associated with Kairos, had taught in our plus unit, which is our faith and character housing unit. Happy to talk more about that. But at the end of their program, she gave every guy a square of fabric and said, write something, draw something on this that tells your story. And then she quilted them all together. And the guys were really touched and also amazed, like, wow, you took these scraps of paper or scraps of fabric and put them together. And I can't imagine ever being able to do that. Well, it's not that hard. I could even teach you guys. Would you? So again, she was literally a little old lady. I've met her. And she taught them how to quilt. And it started off really simple. And they were making quilts kind of like homeless shelters. And she kept coaching. And they ended up being much better than her. My mother taught quilting for 25 years. And so I actually know something about it. And it's like, man, this stuff's great. They entered it into the state fair. They won. And it's all in the context of someone believed that they could make something better than what they had. And one of the guys wrote about quilting is significant because these are just scraps of fabric that aren't of much use to anyone. But when you bring them all together, it's something that's useful and beautiful. And that's what we are. So this was made by Maximum Security men. And I can't wait to get back out there and say, yeah, these were a hit. So it was our privilege to do this. And I actually took my mother out to visit the plush unit at Wabash Valley. And I like my mother. I love my mother. I would not take her into most cell houses in a maximum security prison, but I knew the way community had transformed these men that she'd be well treated and respected. And she donated a lot of fabric to them. They made a quilt for her, took a picture presenting it. It was a little irritating to realize that on my mother's refrigerator, there was a photo of 3 offenders and none of me, but at least I was there to see it. So, I got that going for me. As Evelyn said, my name's Dave Liebel. I'm the Director of Religious Services and Community Engagement for the Indiana Department of Correction. And several people have already asked, well, how did you get here? How do you get that job? And, well, DOC was hiring and I applied because I was looking for a job. But little background, I'm originally from Indianapolis, grew up north side suburbs of here. Nominally Christian because, we're not Jewish, we're not Muslim, so, we're Christian. And mid-20s really had a spiritual awakening, found Christ, and got called into different things. I ended up doing about 4 years of missions work overseas, worked with a variety of faith-based nonprofits, was a church mission director, was a school administrator, and never crossed my mind to work for government. And ended a job with a mission agency and was back here looking for work and ended up being recommended by friends at church the governor just started an office of faith-based and community initiatives. This was 2005 when that was a real buzz phrase of faith-based and community initiatives, and ended up going to work there. And through that, part of my job was reaching out to other state agencies and seeing what they were doing with the faith community. And it was really the Department of Correction that was doing a lot, relying on volunteers, creating opportunities. And it was interesting. And I got to know some people there. And when things started falling apart at my previous agency, if you know of anything, friend said, yeah, our director of religious services is looking for a deputy. Applied, interviewed, hired. My initial assignment was implementing a federal grant to promote healthy fatherhood and responsible marriage. So I'm with the DOC promoting healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood. At the time I had no children. 2 weeks after I started, my wife asked for a divorce. So you think, wow, you must have known a lot about corrections to make up for these other gaps in your resume. No, not really. I knew nothing about corrections. Now, I had seen The Shawshank Redemption at least twice. So I was familiar with the concept. Had watched I think the first 2 seasons of Prison Break. Season 3, don't bother, jump the shark. And I'd gone to church with a guy who spent 6 months in federal prison for mortgage fraud. So that was pretty much it. And when I was given this opportunity tonight, but what have I had to overcome, including, like I said, a total ignorance about prisons, how they work, who's in them, who works in them. And I've been doing this 16 years now, and I've got one of the best jobs I could ever imagine. And I've met some of the best people as volunteers, as coworkers, and as inmates. Just because you're in prison doesn't mean you're a bad guy. Flip side of that, just because you're not in prison doesn't mean you're a good guy. So it was a steep learning curve. And what part of my job was we were conducting 2-day marriage seminars for incarcerated men and their wives or girlfriends. And it was federally funded, and it actually did really well. But I had to learn the culture of prison. And this is where a foreign missions background helped, realizing quickly that every prison has its own culture, that what works one place may not work someplace else. And also that you think you know what's going on, but there's often things that just fly right by you because you don't know what they are. You miss a lot of the cues. You don't know that, oh, you've actually done something offensive because they're being polite and you're being clueless. So some very kind people taught me a lot along the way. Basics include, we all know the phrase, well, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. That does not work in prison. To use the missiological term, prison is a high context society. Things are done for a particular reason, even if most people don't even remember the reason. Things are done a certain way for a purpose. America in general is a very low context society. Yeah, we do it this way, but hey, boy, that seems like kind of a cool thing to try. Well, let's do it that way. That's a great part about America. In prison, you got to ask permission. And there may be reasons that we don't want to do something. You look at what the public expects of us. First thing, don't let anybody escape. I mean, that's kind of job one. You can't really preach or program to somebody who's escaped. So, when we talk about safety and security, we're serious about that because that is a big part of this. Public also doesn't want us to keep people we're not supposed to keep. So, the administrative part's really important. People don't want prisoners tortured. Generally also don't want them coddled. And if we can do something to make their lives better, that's okay, but don't spend a lot of money on it. So Kairos really blends in nicely with that. You help increase our security. Anyone will tell you a Kairos weekend is generally a quiet weekend. There is peer pressure of, I haven't had my Kairos weekend yet, don't screw it up. I want to go, don't you ruin it for me. So it makes the prison a quieter place. It relieves staff from some of the things we have to do because you always come in well equipped. If you don't have enough volunteers, you drop the size of the weekend, and just your presence, it's not just preaching, it's showing God's people to everyone and the value of community. You talk to most people who are incarcerated, they didn't have such a great community. And you talk to guys who come back, they've been full of hope when they were released. They come back, well, what happened? Generally, it was a lack of community. They either went into the wrong community or they were isolated. Kairos as a path to the church addresses that. So we're high on Kairos. It's been incredibly helpful. So we've learned also about the value of transparency. So when we're working with Kairos, we ask permission. They ask permission. We talk through things, and it's an open forum to explain. Well, yeah, we hear what you're trying to do. Here's why we think that's not a good idea, but maybe there's another way we can do that to achieve the result. And I meet once a month with the Kairos state leadership, and partly because, again, I love the program. I did a walk to Emmaus back in 1991. I think it was Louisville Men's Walk number 72, and I sat at the table of Luke. But also, for me, it just makes sense of this is our largest single volunteer organization. Why would I turn down the opportunity to know them and help make plans together? And the Kairos reputation has also been really cemented by service. About 10 years ago, we were all set up for a Kairos weekend at Pendleton Correctional, one of our other maximum security male facilities. Thursday, they brought everything in, done the first night's meeting. Everything was good to go for the weekend. Friday morning, there was a murder. It was gang related, and the facility went on lockdown. And lockdown, nobody goes anywhere. And the Kairos leadership didn't go to the warden or the commissioner and say, well, but our guys are really good and this is a helpful program. So, we've already spent, $6,000 on food. So please, can we go ahead and do our weekend? We promise the guys will behave. None of that. They went to the warden and said, how can we help? And the warden's response was, I have to feed over 2,000 people 3 meals a day now, and I just lost most of my labor force. If you guys really mean it and want to help, come in and make sandwiches. They did. For the next 3 months? There were Kairos volunteers that went in and packed lunches, dinners. You think about feeding 2,000 people over 3 months. I think we calculated 17,000 loaves of bread and almost 8 pounds of bologna, but slight joke. But even people who weren't around then know that story. And when people think of Kairos, they think of service. They don't think of, well, they're going to come in, do their thing, and then they're gone and we never see them again. So you have value as an ongoing ministry. And it's not just the weekend. It's setting that pattern of discipleship, of being in a positive community that, we get a lot of groups that want to come in and preach. And the truth is, it's really, you almost have to work at not hearing the gospel if you're in prison. The challenge is, do you see people living out the gospel? And one of the things to overcome is most people don't want to go to prison. I never wanted to go to prison until I started working there. And most people spend their lives trying to avoid going to prison. So once you overcome that, which you've all have done, that also helps the incarcerated overcome their skepticism, because, I draw a paycheck from the Department of Corrections. So they can explain away anything I do by, well, you're making the big bucks. I would have chosen another field, but whatever. But still, I'm drawing a paycheck and like, hey, you're sincere, you mean well, but end of the day, you're paid to be here. When incarcerated men and women meet you, like, you're giving up your weekends. What, you had to do 40 hours of training for this, and you had to raise money for it to come into prison. Well, either you are the stupidest people that have ever walked through the gates of this prison, or you've got something pretty important to say. And again, that is something as staff that we can never do. You can come in and preach, and not only that, you can come in and live out your testimony. These relationships have paid off in trust. Keep open communication as best you can. Don't hesitate to reach out to the chaplains, wardens, and just say, hey, would you have a few minutes? Because I'd like to know how we can help you. And that'll open a lot of doors. Great example of the trust and the need for open communication. We had an incident at Plainfield Correctional a couple of years ago. One of the Kairos volunteers, they were all set up for the weekend, has his hands in his jacket pocket, finds a 9mm bullet. And he did the right thing and went to the chaplain and said, I just found, I was out shooting the other day. I found a bullet in my pocket. I didn't know it was there. What do we do now? And the chaplain reported it. And you think, well, okay, honest mistake. And that's what it was an honest mistake. But again, we have to kind of look at what's the worst thing that could be happening. Maybe some of those table legs weren't really table legs. Maybe a bunch of other guys have bullets they forgot in their pocket, and this guy just chickened out. That could be a really bad situation. So the warden was called, and they ended up searching all the volunteers, researching the equipment that had been brought in. They searched all the participants, and they went over the video footage from the x-ray machine, and it's like, yeah, the way the bullet happened to lay against the zipper, it looked like a pull tab on a jacket. So the warden said, hey, enjoy the rest of the weekend, and let it go on. That would have not have happened with almost any other ministry, because we don't have that level of trust and relationship. So thank you for being a trusting group. Now, one of the other things I'd encourage you of, don't hesitate to share bad news. And fortunately, the chaplains and the warden had called me and told me what was going on. So I called the state chair Monday morning. Where's Roger? And Roger answered the phone, and I said, "Hey, Roger, you know the difference between Barney Fife and a Kairos volunteer?" He's like, "No, what? Barney Fife is allowed to have one bullet in his pocket." He thought that was the oddest joke anyone had ever told because no one had told him about what had happened over the weekend. So, communication, get to know these people. Again, last thing I'd say is remember, take time with the staff also. You know, nobody really dreams about growing up and working in a prison. And you look in the media, you know, the TV shows, you know, the brave police officers risking their lives to bring the perpetrators into custody. And then the brave prosecutors and judges who see that justice is done and this person is convicted of those heinous crimes. Then you look at the next TV series and it's, well, noble savage, unjustly convicted, and now he's being treated by these Neanderthal prison guards. There's not a lot of positive portrayals. And honestly, what happens is most people who end up working in prison, it's, well, I needed a job and they are hiring. Now, if that's the end of the story, that's kind of a sad story. But what should happen is once they get in, it's like, you know, this is actually pretty meaningful and I'm pretty good at it and it makes a difference. Corrections is a wonderful career if you believe that people can change. If you don't believe that people can change and that they're defined by their worst moment, stay away from working in a prison, stay away from prison ministry because you are going to be miserable. But if you want a chance to see, well, you will see how low people can sink. After just a couple of months around corrections, you stop saying things like, "Oh, nobody would ever do that," because yeah, I can show you who did that, and in fact, a couple of other things you haven't even thought of. But here's the beautiful thing. We get to see how high people can bounce back. Too long of a story, so I won't tell it, but one of the great things I got to do in my career, which is hopefully not over yet, I got to hire a chaplain who previously spent 10 years with us for shooting an 18-year-old girl in the face. And it wasn't an accident. He meant to do it. And, you know, he's now one of our best chaplains. I would not have liked him the way he came in. I love him as a brother and friend now. So keep being an advocate for change. Thank you for the time and welcome to Indiana.